The alley behind the bakery on Maple Street wasn't much to look at. It reeked of spoiled milk and old bread crusts, its cracked pavement littered with discarded paper bags and bottle caps. Rainwater from the previous night pooled in the potholes, catching glimmers of the morning sun but failing to brighten the gloom. It was the kind of place people hurried through, not lingered in, except for the stray cats. And among those strays was Maggie. She was no older than a year, but life in the alley had aged her in ways that didn't show up in numbers. Her once soft fur, now matted and dusted with grime, clung to her thin frame. Her ears bore the telltale notches of street skirmishes, and her golden eyes, once likely wide and curious, were tired, cautious. Each sound, each shadow, made her flinch. Maggie hadn't always lived like this. Her memories of warm rooms, gentle voices, and toys shaped like fish were blurry, like a dream too distant to touch. What she remembered clearly was the cold floor of the alley, the cold rain that soaked her to the bone, and worst of all, the cold silence of being left behind. It had happened suddenly. One minute, she was curled on a soft blanket in the backseat of a car, the scent of her human's coat nearby. The next, she was on the pavement beside an overflowing dumpster, the car speeding away without so much as a backward glance. Maggie had meowed until her voice gave out. She had chased after them until her paws ached. But no one came back. No one called her name. She had learned to survive the only way she could, by hiding. She became a shadow among shadows, slipping beneath crates and cardboard, darting between garbage cans. She scavenged crumbs and licked the insides of takeout containers. At night, she curled up on flattened boxes and dreamed of warmth she no longer believed in. One particularly cold morning in early spring, Maggie huddled beneath an overturned wooden pallet. Her stomach growled, and her body shivered despite her curled position. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. The bakery had closed for renovations, and the usual scraps were gone. Her eyes blinked slowly as exhaustion crept in, heavy as the clouds above. Then came the sound. Soft, slow, footsteps. She perked up. Humans passed through the alley sometimes, but few noticed her. Most didn't care. Some even shouted or threw things. Maggie pressed herself into the shadows, trembling. The footsteps paused. There was a rustling sound. Paper? Plastic? MRRR. It wasn't her who made the sound. Another cat? Maggie crept forward, careful to stay hidden. Around the corner of the dumpster, a woman knelt on the concrete, gently setting down a shallow bowl of water and a small paper plate piled with what looked, and smelled, like shredded chicken. "There you go," the woman whispered. Maggie recognized the other figure now. A calico Tom with a mangled ear, known to the alley as Smudge. He approached the food cautiously, but the woman didn't move. She just sat there, speaking in a low, calm voice. "I've been coming here for weeks. You're finally trusting me, huh?" Maggie watched as Smudge devoured the chicken. Her stomach twisted with hunger. She wanted to move forward, to claim a share. But her legs wouldn't obey. She didn't trust this woman. Not yet. The woman left the food and walked away quietly, leaving the dishes behind. Maggie waited until nightfall. She returned to the plate and found a few scraps. Not much, but enough to survive another day. Enough to hope she'd come back. And she did. Every day. She came with chicken, tuna, clean water. She whispered soothing words to the cats that gathered slowly, those brave, or desperate, enough to come forward. Maggie remained hidden, but she watched. And slowly, something inside her began to shift. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was the idea of it. The beginning of a memory of something gentler. Over the next week, Maggie crept closer. Just an inch or two each day. She let the scent of real food tempt her forward. Her ribs showed beneath her dirty fur. Her left eye had begun to crust over from infection. She limped slightly from a wound on her back paw. On the 8th day, the woman saw her. "Oh," she whispered softly. "You're new." Maggie froze. The woman didn't move. "It's okay. You're safe." A voice. Kind. Like the ones she used to know. Maggie didn't flee. She didn't run. She simply lowered her head and took a step back. The next day, the woman brought something extra. A small plastic pet carrier, door open, a blanket inside. Maggie stared at it, torn between terror and fascination. She didn't understand cages, but something about that soft blanket called to her. And then the woman said something that stopped her cold. "You look like you've been through a lot, sweet girl. I won't force you, but if you're tired of this life, there's a better one." Maggie didn't move that day. Or the day after. But on the third morning, rain began to fall again, cold and merciless. Maggie's body ached. Her fur was soaked through. And when she saw the open carrier waiting with the soft blanket inside, she didn't think. She just crawled in. The woman didn't snap the door shut. Not right away. She waited. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "I promise, this is just the beginning." Then, with a gentle hand, she closed the door, and Maggie, for the first time in weeks, didn't try to escape. The ride to the vet was quiet. Maggie curled into the blanket, too tired to cry, too weak to care. She was examined under warm lights. A woman in scrubs whispered comforting things and stroked her head. They checked her paw, cleaned her eye, treated her fleas. The vet winced when they weighed her. "She's severely underweight, anemic, probably hasn't had real food in a long time. Can she recover?" the woman asked. "With care," the vet replied. "And love." The woman smiled. "She'll have both." Maggie spent 3 days in recovery. She had her own space, her own bowl of food. She didn't have to fight. Didn't have to run. Her eyes slowly cleared. Her paw began to heal. And then, one morning, she was placed into the same carrier, only this time, it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a beginning. The woman took her home. And for the first time in Maggie's short, chaotic life, she had a home. But she didn't understand that yet. Her body was healing. Her heart would take longer. She spent the first night under the couch. The second night, she slept in the corner. But on the third night, something changed. The woman, her rescuer, her human, sat on the rug, holding a small toy mouse. She squeaked it once, then let it dangle from a string. Maggie watched from the shadows. She wanted to look away. She wanted to stay distant. But her paw lifted, slowly, and batted at the air. The mouse danced. Maggie's eyes lit up. She batted again. The toy flew across the room, and she chased it. Her human laughed, clapping her hands. "There she is. There's the real you." For the first time in a long time, Maggie felt a tiny flicker inside her chest. It felt like joy, but she didn't trust it yet. Not entirely. She would learn. And as she curled up that night on a fleece blanket beside her new human's bed, stomach full, body warm, and heart slightly less guarded, Maggie began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the first few weeks in her new home felt like a blur to Maggie. It was a mix of strange sounds, new smells, and moments of warmth she didn't quite know how to process. The house was much bigger than the alley, the walls lined with soft furniture and cozy nooks that seemed made for hiding. But Maggie didn't want to hide anymore, not all the time. The woman, who Maggie had started to think of as her human, though the idea still felt foreign, spent hours sitting on the floor, gently coaxing Maggie out from under the couch, from behind the curtains, or from beneath the chairs. Every time, she'd speak in that soft, sweet voice, like she was trying to reassure Maggie that everything would be okay. At first, Maggie didn't trust her completely. She had learned long ago that humans weren't always kind. The suddenness with which her former owner had abandoned her still echoed in her mind. But this human was different. She never raised her voice. She didn't try to pull Maggie from hiding. She waited. She sat quietly. And every now and then, she'd leave a small treat on the floor, just out of reach, as if to say, "When you're ready." Maggie wasn't quite sure what being ready meant. She didn't know if she would ever feel ready to trust. But she did start to respond. Slowly. Each time she let her guard down, the world outside her hiding place seemed a little less threatening. She even let the human pet her once, just the tip of her fingers on Maggie's back as she sat at the edge of the couch. The touch was tentative at first, almost like an experiment, but it felt warm. Comforting. And so Maggie began to experiment too. She would poke her head out, her golden eyes wide, watching her human. She would bat at the soft, dangling string toy again, her playful side creeping back out, just for a moment. The next time, she stayed out for longer. The day Maggie took her first real nap in the sunbeam on the floor was a moment of quiet triumph. The warm light, combined with the safety she felt in her new home, lulled her into a deep sleep. For the first time since her abandonment, Maggie didn't feel the constant tension in her muscles, ready to flee at a moment's notice. She let herself relax. Her human smiled from across the room. "You're a beautiful girl, Maggie." The words were soft but firm, like she was telling Maggie something that she could believe. "You are worthy of love." As the weeks passed, Maggie began to adjust to her new life. Her fur was slowly growing back, soft and shiny. She no longer had the sickly, matted patches of her former life. The wound on her paw had healed completely, and the infection in her eye was gone. Her coat gleamed with the kind of health that spoke of care and attention. The once emaciated cat now had a plump belly, and while it wasn't yet as sleek as it could be, it was enough to show that Maggie was on her way to recovery. One evening, Maggie ventured into the kitchen. She didn't know what drew her there, perhaps the scent of roasted chicken wafting in from the stove, but she padded quietly across the floor, her paws light and silent. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for the human to invite her. For the first time, Maggie walked with purpose, like she had a right to be there. Her human looked down in surprise as Maggie brushed past her legs, close enough that Maggie could feel the soft fabric of her pants. For a second, they both stood still. The human didn't move, unsure whether Maggie wanted to be near her or if she was just passing through. But then, Maggie did something unexpected. She raised her head, her gaze meeting the human's, her tail flicking gently in the air. It was a silent invitation, an invitation to connect, to share this moment. Her golden eyes were not full of fear anymore. They were full of curiosity, and maybe even a bit of affection. The human knelt down slowly, offering a piece of chicken from the plate she'd been preparing. "I think you've earned this, Maggie." Maggie's mouth watered at the smell. Tentatively, she took a small step forward, then another, until she was just close enough to accept the offering. The human's hand hovered, as if unsure whether Maggie would snatch the food and run or simply turn away. But Maggie didn't run. She took the piece of chicken gently from her human's fingers, the soft brush of skin against skin sending a spark of connection that made Maggie pause. The moment felt monumental. She chewed slowly, savoring the taste of something rich and nourishing. She wasn't looking over her shoulder to see if she needed to run. She wasn't watching for shadows or footsteps that signaled danger. For the first time, Maggie could focus on the present, on the warmth of her body and the kindness of the human who had taken her in. After that, things changed again. Maggie began to understand the rhythms of the house. She learned the schedule: morning walks in the garden, meals at set times, and quiet evenings by the fireplace. She learned the soft hum of her human's voice as she worked, the soothing sound of music drifting through the house. And she learned where the best sunbeams were, those warm, golden patches that made her fur gleam like silk. But Maggie's favorite part of the day came after dinner, when the human would settle on the couch with a book or her knitting. Maggie would jump up beside her, stretching out on the cushions, content. Sometimes, she would nestle against her human's legs, her soft purring filling the room like a quiet song. The human would run her fingers through Maggie's soft fur, and for those moments, Maggie felt truly safe, no longer astray, no longer abandoned. She was simply Maggie, her human's Maggie. One evening, as the moonlight crept through the window, casting long shadows across the floor, Maggie did something else that surprised both of them. She crawled into the human's lap. It wasn't the hurried, half-hearted approach she had taken at first. This time, Maggie stretched out with the grace of someone who had truly come home. The human froze, her heart swelling in her chest. But she didn't move. She just stroked Maggie's back gently, breathing in the soft scent of her clean fur. And Maggie, her golden eyes half-lidded in contentment, began to purr again, a low, rumbling sound that spoke of trust, of belonging, and of the deep, quiet bond they were beginning to share. For the first time in what felt like forever, Maggie let herself feel loved. She didn't have to prove anything anymore. Maggie had found her place, but what she didn't know was that the rest of the world was about to see her in an entirely new light. The human, whose name Maggie now understood to be Grace, had always known that Maggie had more love to give, but she had no idea just how deeply Maggie could connect with others. One afternoon, when Grace was at the door preparing to leave for work, Maggie meowed at her with a small urgency. It wasn't the normal greeting she gave Grace when she returned home, but rather a sound that tugged at Grace's heart. Maggie's meow was gentle, but it held an unmistakable tone of concern, as if she had just noticed something Grace hadn't. Grace bent down, looking at her cat with a small smile. "What is it, Maggie?" "Are you hungry? Or did you want to play?" Maggie meowed again, a little more insistent. She began to pace back and forth, darting between Grace's legs and meowing loudly, as though urging her to stay. It was a strange moment. Maggie had never been this vocal or forceful before. Grace's brow furrowed with confusion. "I'm just going to work, sweet girl. I'll be home soon. You'll be fine." But as she opened the door, a sudden chill ran through the air. Grace's heart skipped a beat. The wind had picked up outside, and the familiar sound of the trees rustling and the birds singing had stopped altogether. There was something eerily quiet about the street. Maggie, who had been at her side moments earlier, was now sitting still by the door, staring outside. And then it happened. Grace heard it, just a soft, muffled noise that seemed faint but familiar. It was a small cry, faint but definitely from a baby. A voice that sounded scared, lost, alone. "Maggie," Grace whispered, her hand gripping the doorframe. She turned and looked at the cat, her mind racing. Maggie's eyes were wide, full of intent. It was clear. Maggie had heard something Grace hadn't noticed. Without thinking, Grace stepped outside, her eyes scanning the ground for the source of the sound. The wind howled, and the evening air was colder than it had been in weeks. But then, there it was, a small bundle lying just outside the fence. At first, Grace thought it was a small, abandoned animal, but as she got closer, she realized it was a human baby, bundled in layers of tattered clothing, clearly neglected and alone. Grace gasped, dropping to her knees and immediately scooping up the baby. She could feel the coldness of the child's skin, a sign of how long it had been outside in the freezing night. The baby's eyes fluttered open briefly, weakly, before closing again in exhaustion. In a haze of shock and disbelief, Grace cradled the child, rushing back inside with her heart pounding. She locked the door behind her, the weight of the situation settling in. As she moved quickly through the house to the phone, she felt Maggie's presence close by, her body tense, but her eyes full of a calm understanding. The cat had sensed this, the danger, the need, long before Grace had. Grace dialed the emergency services, explaining the situation with trembling hands. It felt surreal, but she couldn't have been more certain. This little baby had been left out in the cold, abandoned in the same way Maggie had been. Grace's heart broke at the thought. The baby needed care and warmth, just like Maggie once had. Minutes later, paramedics arrived, their flashing lights casting long shadows across the walls. They took the baby into their care, wrapping her in blankets, carefully checking her vitals. Grace stood aside, unable to say a word. Her hands trembled as she held on to Maggie, who sat beside her, her fur soft and comforting against Grace's side. Maggie had done more than just warn her about the baby. Maggie had connected them, and in that moment, Maggie became more than just a cat. She became a symbol of intuition, of hope, and of kindness that transcended everything. Weeks passed. The baby girl, whom Grace and the doctors had named Emily, was adopted by a kind family that had been waiting for a child of their own. Grace visited her often, watching as Emily grew stronger, laughing with her adoptive parents. But there was something about that night that bonded Emily to Maggie and Grace in ways that neither would ever forget. Maggie, once a broken and abandoned creature in the alley, had become a hero in her own right. She had been the one to notice the silent plea for help and, with her unspoken understanding, had led Grace to the baby. She had not only saved a life that night, but she had reminded Grace of something she had long since forgotten, the power of connection, of listening to the small voices that often go unheard. Maggie's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. The shy, nervous cat who had once lived in constant fear was now playful, affectionate, and full of joy. She loved to curl up with Grace on the couch, purring loudly, as they watched their favorite shows together. And in the mornings, Maggie would sit by the window, watching the birds flutter in the garden, her tail flicking with excitement. But the best moments were the quiet ones. The mornings when Maggie would stretch lazily in a sunbeam, looking at Grace with her golden eyes, full of trust and love. The evenings when Maggie would curl up beside her, resting her head on Grace's lap, knowing that no matter what had happened before, she was home now. Safe, loved, and perhaps most of all, the moments when Maggie would look at Emily, who had visited once or twice, a small smile on the child's face as Maggie purred contentedly by her side. Maggie had come full circle, from being a stray, abandoned in an alley, to becoming the heart of a home, the anchor of a family. She had brought joy, warmth, and love to Grace's life, and to everyone who had come to know her. For Maggie, there was no longer any question. She had a family now. And in return, they had her love.